Hi, Howard.
Alana, I'm looking at you and wondering whether I got the signal. Okay. Hello and welcome. It is my great honor to open our program, Jewish Peoplehood, What's Next, honoring the life and career of a giant in the professional Jewish world, my friend and mentor, Rabbi Daniel Allen. Judging from the names that I saw coming up as this group assembled, this is quite an extraordinary international gathering reflective of a generation or more of some of the great leaders of the Jewish world. And I'm not sure under normal circumstances this particular kind of gathering would even have been possible. But the silver lining of our peculiar reality is that we, a group that will probably number as many as 200, will take part in today's tribute and program. My name is Doron Krakow. I am President and CEO of JCC Association of North America and a proud member of the board of JPRO Network. I have the privilege of welcoming you all on behalf of JPRO Network and its exemplary leadership, our CEO, Alana Azen, and our board chair, Audra Berg. JPRO's mission is to connect, educate, inspire, and empower professionals working in the Jewish community sector, a mission that was near and dear to the heart of Danny Allen, who served as president of JPRO's predecessor organization, the Association of Jewish Communal Organization Professionals. In the early part of this meeting, my colleagues at JPRO will be putting a couple of links into the chat, which I hope you will have a chance to look at, that will provide you with insights into what JPRO is doing today, including special initiatives to support the fields that contends with the challenges of COVID-19. I met Danny Allen after I met his son Noah, who was my chanich and a proud part of New Jersey Young Judea. I met Danny Allen after I met his wife, Mary Lou, who was heading student enrollment at the Solomon Schechter School in New Milford, New Jersey. I met Danny Allen when he was already a giant in our field, the longtime head of United Israel Appeal. I came to UJC, now JFNA, in 2002 as head of Israel and overseas. Though Danny had already left that role, he was then heading the Jewish Federation of Greater Hartford in Connecticut. And he went out of his way to share wisdom and extraordinary insights about the ways of the Federation system to which I was a newcomer, and about key players and personalities, even about how to manage the extensive travel to Israel that I was about to begin. He was a role model in his unabashed commitment to Zionism and Israel, and he helped me feel empowered to project that same kind of commitment, one that is a cornerstone of my life and my work to this day, that Israel should be an engine for strengthening Jewish life in every Jewish community across the globe. Over the years, I found myself reaching out to Danny on a wide variety of issues and questions for wisdom, for encouragement, or just for a shoulder to lean on. I miss him very much. Through Danny, I had the great pleasure of working with his daughter, Sarah, during my tenure with American Associates Ben-Gurion University. And thanks to Danny, I have an ongoing relationship with Mary Lou, Sarah, Noah, and the entire Allen family, who have become like extended members of my own. I am incredibly proud to be part of today's tribute and to turn this program over to Rabbi Jack Luxemburg, a longtime friend of Danny and the Allen family. Thank you, Jack, for being our partner in planning today's program and for serving as our facilitator.
Daron, thank you. A rabbinical school classmate of Danny's, we were friends, colleagues, and confidants for over 45 years. And during my career as a congregational rabbi, it was my privilege to participate in various enterprises that kept me in close touch with Danny and his family, including the rabbinic cabinet of what was the UJA, then CJF, now JFNA, and a representative of the rabbinate on JFNA's board of directors and executive committee. Danny and I were both deeply involved in ARTSA, the Association of Reformed Zionists in America. He as the executive director and myself as a longtime officer. And currently, due in part to Danny's encouragement and support, I keep involved in Zionist affairs as the vice chairperson of ARTSENU, the International Federation of Reformed Zionists, the banner under which we sit as a movement in the World Zionist Congress. What brings Danny's colleagues, friends, and collaborators, his classmates, family, and loved ones together is our appreciation for an important, meaningful life full of purpose and accomplishment cut short by a terrible disease. Danny fought the disease despite the odds, determined, persistent, productive, and undeterred to the end. In life, those very qualities made him an outstanding Jewish professional, congregational rabbi, Hillel director, federation executive, organizational leader, including stints as the professional leader of UIA, Magen David Adom USA, and ARTSA. Indeed, every local, national, and international enterprise in which Danny participated flourished because of his leadership, devotion, and determination. Danny was savvy, politically astute, if not always politic. Many on this call have both hugged Danny and knocked heads with him. And even if we didn't see things the same way in the moment, let's acknowledge that time often proved Danny to be right. And let us also acknowledge this, that all he did was b'shem Shemayim. It was not about him. It was rather about the highest and most noble of Jewish ideals. Danny was not only a Verbrennte Zionist, Danny was Verbrennte about everything. He thought deeply, cared greatly, felt intensely. He was a student of the Jewish past, including the Shoah, which we commemorate tonight and tomorrow. Feeling deeply the loss of our martyred 6 million, he drew strength and inspiration from the heroes and heroines of those dark days. And in response, he devoted himself to the Jewish future, to the ongoing vitality of the Jewish people, to the vision of a vibrant, inclusive, democratic, and secure state of Israel, to building Jewish communities and strengthening Jewish continuity, historically and spiritually. Along with Danny's friends, family, and loved ones, I am glad that we have gathered to honor and to remember him. I would be gladder still if Danny was with us, to enjoy the give and take, to congratulate and thank the participants, and in a quiet moment later on, offer me his gentle critique of the program. I will miss that as we all miss him. Zecher Tzadik Lebracha. May his life be an inspiration, his memory a blessing. And now I'd like to introduce two colleagues who could not better represent the informed analysis and dynamic activism that Danny embodied. Our speakers, Gil Troy and Anat Hoffman. Danny admired both of them, and I know that they deeply appreciated Danny's life work as well. After they introduce themselves, we will launch into our conversation. Please note that there will be a brief Q&A at the end of the call. So write your questions in the chat at any time. Send them to our host, Ilana Azen, CEO of JPRO Network. Anat, I turn to you for some words of introduction.
Can you hear me now? No? You can hear me? Okay. I often ask North American Jews, what is the first thing that pops into their mind when they think about Israel? And most people like to say, while they're sitting on their sofa in their home in Miami or Milwaukee, that it's their homeland, despite the fact that they don't speak the language, despite the fact that the weather would kill them in July and August, despite the fact that the drudgery of everyday life would drive them crazy, besides the fact that they don't know what is a sufrito and what is matbucha, it's their homeland. They feel a connection to the only Jewish state on the planet. They want it to do well. They're proud of its achievements and they're ashamed of its flaws. But the most important point there is land. They are connected to land. For Danny, Israel was the home. He was one of the rare North American Jews that actually was at home in Tel Aviv as he was in New Jersey. He knew he could talk shop about Israel. He knew the nuances. He knew the players. He could curse with us, the referee. He knew the laws of driving, the laws of taxes, and he's sorely missed in the landscape and ecology of the work that's done between North American and Israelis. He was really one person that was at home in both those homelands, and he is missing in the landscape as well as missing in my heart. I'm very grateful to him as a rabbi, as a teacher, as a friend, as a donor. He knew what's what, and he focused on helping on real needs of real people. You can't go wrong when you go that way.
Thank you, Anat, and welcome. Now, a few words of introduction from our second interlocutor, Gil Troy.
Erev Tov, good evening from Jerusalem. I'm feeling a little inadequate here because I did not have the intense, intimate relationship that so many of you had with Danny, and the more I've learned about him over these last couple of weeks, the more I've felt a lack and a loss. We had a hello, how are you kind of relationship. But I connect to him and his legacy. First of all, I think we're both fellow Jewish patriots, and that ability to just kind of love the Jewish people with all our craziness and all our flaws is something that we shared, and is something that definitely gets me up in the morning and gets me balancing my two worlds as an American historian and as a Zionist loudmouth. And when I learned more and more about him, and I learned that he'd been the head of ARTSA, it was particularly important to me because when I put together my book, The Zionist Ideas, and I made different streams of Zionism, political Zionism and religious Zionism and visionist Zionism and cultural Zionism and labor Zionism, diaspora Zionism, in addition to him fitting into so many, one of the very important ideological statements I made was to include reform and conservative rabbis in religious Zionism, and to make sure that it was very clear that religious Zionism didn't mean Orthodox Zionism. And that's my posthumous gift to Danny.
Gil, thank you so much. So let's get started. Gil, you once wrote, and I quote, "I am tired of attending gripe sessions about Israel diaspora tensions without hearing constructive suggestions to build unity." Agreed. We today are not interested in gripes or tiresome tropes. We, like Danny, are interested in creative, forward-thinking, concrete, constructive action. So let's set aside the Israel diaspora dialectic and instead address this question. What is the best way for us to understand the character of the Jewish enterprise now, in this moment, and for the future? Are we, first and foremost, to borrow from ourselves an Am, a people or folk with all the shared social, cultural, and spiritual dimensions that suggests? Are we a Goy, a national unity, be it Goy Kadosh, as suggested in Torah, or Goy Echad Ba'aretz, as found in the Siddur? Or perhaps we are a Bayit, as in Beit Yisrael, a familial entity with all the reciprocal bonds, interdependence, and shared destiny that implies. Goy, Bayit, how do you see us? How should we see ourselves? Which of these images can unify us, motivate us, serve us best now, and carry us into the future? Gil, I'd like to begin with you.
Well,
for about
first,
5 minutes.
Let me say, ouch. There's nothing more excruciating than being quoted back to yourself and then having to live up to that standard. It's much more fun to just sort of pontificate and tell everybody else what they have to do.
Okay, you have 5 minutes to participate.
Right. And let me start with, let me also continue with two things that we're not. Okay. One is we're not just anti-Semites. And I say that well aware of the fact that we've already started Yom HaShoah here in Jerusalem, that we cannot just be defensive, reactive Jews. We have to be proactive. And I like the fact that you're thinking of different forms of glue, different forms of connectedness we can have. And the second thing we're not, I spoke to a group of Harvard students on Zoom last week, and in the Q&A, a young woman identified herself as an Israel critic. It's a very fascinating framework because, I don't know, I know many people who are highly critical of Donald Trump, but they don't call themselves an American critic, And I think this kind of notion of defining your connectedness through what you hate and through your anger is also toxic. That doesn't mean we don't criticize. That doesn't mean we don't push for change, but we don't only define ourselves in the negative. So how do we do it in the positive? And you know, the beautiful thing about a 3,500-year-old tradition is that the short answer I can give you, Jack, is just yes. Right now, I'm finishing a book with Natan Sharansky, and we're using his life story, this extraordinary life story of this Soviet refusenik, this human rights activist, this Israeli cabinet minister, this leader and friend, to tell a broader story of this connectedness. And in searching for a title, I was speaking to a friend of mine in Los Angeles and telling the story that when Natan was in the Gulag for 9 years, and the KGB kept on telling him, you're forgotten, you're abandoned, you're lost. He was in isolation for 405 days of those 9 years and rarely had visitors. But he said, I knew I was never alone. And that is the title of the book. And that is, I think, our vision, that we're never alone. That, yes, we're a house, and that sense of familiarity is one of the reasons why we drive each other crazy. And I think in these days of coronavirus, everybody knows the intensity that comes from being cooped up and connected and not being able to escape from one another, but also being so tied with one another. I think we are indeed a goy because we are a community of faith. And, but at the end of the day, we are a people with a mission, and we can't forget that mission. And so I think we have to reframe and remember that when you're part of this extraordinary thing called the Jewish people, you're never alone. I think we have to renegotiate and maybe talk, even though we're a people of the covenant, of a new covenant. What are the things that connect us? And really every 40, 50, 60 years, and I think we really need it now, articulate what are the core values and what are the core ideals that unite us, even amidst our diversity. I think we need to reform a little bit. I think it might be helpful, for example, to start thinking about maybe we could have some kind of Jewish People's Council that would include diaspora Jews and Israelis to, even at an advisory level, give ideas, work out issues. And even if we don't agree, we at least would feel like we have some kind of consent of the governed, as opposed to simply the responsibility of the implicated, simply being burdened by somebody else. And a fourth idea, and with this I'll end, is I think we also need to reaffirm our commitment to one another, our commitment to this big, broad mission of the Jewish people, but also our sense of responsibility. And I think we sometimes lose that proportionality. Sometimes we're so busy fighting our particular fights, our particular battles, pushing our particular crusade, that we forget that we have to have a responsibility to also reach out, to listen to one another, to learn with one another, to build with one another. And if I can finish with one anecdote, when I was in Florida shortly after Donald Trump won, and I was warned by I was actually preaching a sermon. It was so exciting. I only just get to lecture, but I was preaching to a congregation, and the rabbi warned me, he said, don't talk politics. We're deeply divided. And of course I talked politics, but I talked about how do we find a platform where we can agree even when we disagree. And I finished as a professor by giving some homework, which I'd like to give you the same homework assignment. I said, find someone who voted the wrong way in the last election and speak to them. And then I got the best correction I ever got in my life. Somebody came up to me afterwards and said, I'm a psychologist. Next time you say that, don't just say and speak to them, say and listen to them. I think we need to listen to one another, and I think that was Danny's legacy. L'chaim.
L'chaim. Gil, thank you so very much for getting us started. Anat, I'd like to hear your take on the same question. And then when you're done, why don't you respond to Gil with either a comment or a question?
Well, the first thing is that Gil is a teacher to all of us, a star. Thank you. These 5 minutes I have to now think about for 5 days. I'm a crusader, so it's harder for me to speak in these terms. Today I saw that Itzik Sudri, who used to be the speaker of Shas and then was taken to be an advisor to Netanyahu, he realizes it's Yom HaShoah coming up, and he writes about a little what's it called, Twitter, that an American girl wrote. She wrote, because of the coronavirus, I can't give my dog her bat mitzvah. And she has a little picture of her dog with a kippah and a little talit. He writes, on this day, I don't want to cause conflict. I will just say very gently, this is not the Judaism we were hoping for. Not this Judaism and not its twin sister, the Women of the Wall in Israel. Sad. This is the Twitter thing. He doesn't want to, on this day of Yom HaShoah, to remind us, but he's taking an innocuous, nothing of a, look, I spent 20 years visiting American congregations. I met 2 congregations that actually knew about the possibility of a bar mitzvah. There's a nonsensical, innocuous thing that some rabbis do to get the kids after bar mitzvah to come to shul. And I think all is fair in trying to get kids to shul after bar mitzvah. It's a very difficult thing. Bring your pets. In all 20 years, twice I heard that this really been done. But it's been rammed down my throat for the last 20 years by the Orthodox. Even today on Yom HaShoah, he has 30,000 followers that he is contaminating with demonizing North American Jews and telling them that what we're busy doing is bar mitzvah to dogs. Why did we come here? Why are we in Israel? I've devoted my adult life to this project because I think it's the most important Jewish project of my lifetime. My grandparents came here in the 20s, way before the Holocaust, because they were seeking a different society. My grandparents were devout communists. Once Amos Oz was traveling, I think in '79, with Heinrich Bell, the German author. And the author asked him, why are you here? And Amos Oz was deliberating, should I answer him the way Bet Shammai does, the hard answer, like go study the history of the Jewish people for the last 3,500 years, or like Bet Hillel on one leg? And I decided, he says, to tell him on one leg. I said, we came here to be reconciled. Reconciled with the land, reconciled with each other, reconciled with our history, reconciled with life. I know that I've been mostly in combat, fighting racism, fighting for tolerance, fighting for equality, fighting for pluralism. So it's hard to say that I believe in reconciliation, but I do believe in it. And in fact, coronavirus has opened my heart to the possibility of reconciling, because my heart is broken to look at what the casualties in the ultra-Orthodox sector. And I think maybe another silver lining of this terrible disease is that we will have to note the fact that Reform Jews, conservative Jews, and Orthodox Jews are all victims of the coronavirus. And it's time we put things in perspective. My grandfather used to think that Zionism is a diagnosis, a prescription, and a therapy. I think he was trying to release himself from a jail, both a physical and a psychological jail, when he came and founded one of the first kibbutzim right here near Jerusalem. My mother is the first daughter of that kibbutz. And when I asked myself, what can we do together? I think we have to realize that Israel is way too important to be left to the Israelis. We need you 133 participants here. We need you. Don't let Israelis tell you that you should just be like an ATM, just pay up and shut up. You need to participate. It's not a spectator sport. We need you to care about some of our ailments and help Israelis who are trying to change them. Our democracy is under threat. Racism is tolerated in a way that is just unacceptable in a Jewish state. And I could give you a long list of things. Just tell me what your passions are. There are Israelis that are eager to work with you. We just need to speak truth to each other and focus on real needs of real people, and we can't go wrong.
Anat, thank you. Powerful as always. Was there something that Gil said that you'd like to comment on or question him about?
I wanted to hear what are different forms of glue.
Gil? And then if, after a brief response, I'd be interested in you responding or commenting with the question on Anat's remarks.
Okay. Different forms of glue are the ties that bind us. You know, there's a psychologist who warns that we have a tendency in modern society to define everybody by the worst thing they ever did. We're so good at that with our politicians. And I think we do that also with the Orthodox, the Reform, the Bar Mitzvah, the tweet. And the ability to see beyond that. I participated in a Zoom funeral in Jerusalem where I watched ultra-Orthodox Chevra Kadisha, who on a given day will often drive many people in a Jerusalem funeral crazy, that they were doing not just Avodat Kodesh, holy work, but they were doing their civic duty, risking their lives by burying this person, not asking whether the person was ultra-Orthodox or not. And I think we need to tell those stories too. I think we need to hear about the good, not just the bad. I think we need to hear about the way Israel is an identity platform for us, the way Israel is an inspiration for us, not just Israel's ailments. And so, so the glue are the things we often take for granted. We're so good at taking the good for granted. We're so good at taking the muvan me'elav, the understood, that yeah, we're connected somehow, but let's fight. And I think especially in today's world where the media zeroes in on the conflict. Even let's go to the Kotel. When I hear that so many rabbis get up again and again in American congregations and only talk about the Kotel through the prism of women on the wall, and I'm with you in the struggle, and I admire so much of what you've done and your inspiration. But if the only thing about the Kotel is that, we're missing the tremendous history. We're missing the tremendous inspiration. And I know that at Birthright we've checked this. In the last 3 years, I had Len Sachs, who's our Birthright numbers guy. Look, when most young American Jewish students come to Israel and they look at the Kotel, they don't look at it through the prism of conflict. They call it the highlight of their spiritual lives. They often call it the highlight of their birthright journey. So, we used to talk in Israel about vitamin P protexia. I think we need vitamin P proportion and vitamin P perspective. And those are the glues. So the glues are, and I think Jack did a beautiful job at the beginning of talking about that. Is it a community of faith? Yes. Is it a community with a mission? Yes. And is it also a family, a bayit? Absolutely.
Thank you, Gil. Would you like to pose something in return to Anat based on her remarks?
Yeah, so I'd like to invite you. You listed some of the ailments that need fixing in Israel, and I'm with you. And let's figure out how the two of us can work together, and all of us on this call can work together, building bridges to make sure that there is no racism and that there is no sexism and that the democracy thrives. But let's also emphasize, what are the most special things that you want these people on the call to hear about Israel? What's the good news that's emanating even on this dark day of Yom HaShoah and this complicated day of a national unity government, which on the one hand is expressing a certain value that most Israelis wanted some kind of unity, but obviously is going to be a deal that I think almost every one of us on the call could have many, many things to complain about.
Well, I'll quote Amos Oz, who said, if I'm going to fall anywhere, I don't want to fall in Berlin in the street or in New York. I want to fall in Tel Aviv. They will lift me up, they will pick me up, then they'll curse me out once they figure out I'm Amos Oz, but that's the best place for me to fall because everyone will stop whatever they're doing to lift me up. And look, you're right that we need these 2 vitamins. However, I'm a wart doctor, and a wart doctor needs to zero on the wart. And I need to be focused on the wart and see how to fix it. If I'm not focused and so anyway, for the birthday of Israel, Yom HaAtzmaut, I asked my staff, we're 30 people, most of us are lawyers. We sue the state of Israel more than once a week, 60 times a year. And I asked people, give me 72 things you love about Israel and 72 things you want to fix in Israel. And I did the same with our donors. We have 30,000 people reading my newsletter, and I wrote them, they would write 72 things to fix in Israel and 72 things to love about Israel. And the interesting phenomena is that the North Americans showered us with wonderful things to love about Israel. They couldn't come up with many things to fix. And my staff could barely come up with things to love and came up with many things to fix. The reason is that when someone from America wrote us that she was on a Friday night trying to change a $100 bill to shkalim on a Friday afternoon, and the money changer gave her the money and said Shabbat Shalom. She was floored. A money changer said Shabbat Shalom. we wouldn't even notice this. What would a person say on a Friday? Of course they'll say Shabbat Shalom. On Thursday they'll say Shabbat Shalom. So what made the Americans so moved is really trivial, you're right. So the traffic stops on Yom Kippur. Okay, of course the traffic stops on Yom Kippur. Of course, Kol Israel begins with the trope of Genesis. This, of course, we speak Hebrew. So what we take for granted, you're right, is lots of reasons to love Israel. And the birthright kids that look at the wall the way it is run and are robbed of the possibility of actually holding hands together and having an experience that in any way resembles their background, that's something that bothers me.
Yeah.
Go ahead, please.
Look, it bothers me too, but then, we make sure to bring them to Robinson's Arch, which I actually think is a more poetic, romantic part of the Kotel. I think what's interesting about what you're saying is, that which we take for granted is actually a miracle, right? Think about how young this country is.
Yes.
Think about how unformed this country is.
I agree.
Think about how surrounded we are by enemies. Think about the fact that Israel has emerged as one of the world leaders in fighting COVID-19. And we take that for granted, right? Every day you're seeing in the newspaper, Israel may be the head of on the vaccine and this and that. First of all, that's not even the Israel of 20 years ago, right? That's, we also like to talk about, our grandfather's Israel as if it was this perfect Israel. Until 1966, Israeli Arabs didn't have even a shot at full rights under military regime. We have to be careful not to fall into the false nostalgia. And that's the work we need to do. We need to, and it's true, one of the things I loved about working with birthright students from here, from the side in Jerusalem, is I love looking at Israel through their lens of blue and white and Hava Nagila and love, and inviting them in ultimately to a more complex one, because we know resilience, real connectedness comes not from false romanticization, but comes from complexity. True love isn't Hollywood love or Disney love. It's the love that I read about people having with their wives. I have a perfect relationship with my wife, but in the New York Times, all this advice, right? Because true love is overcoming the frustrations. And that's where we have to get vis-a-vis Israel and diaspora and vis-a-vis the Jewish people. And again, I go back to the vocabulary that Jack was introducing. And again, I don't want to look at it. I'm not an either or guy. So dimensionality, right? The dimension of peoplehood, the dimension of goy, the dimension of bayit. These are the things that are the basis, the platform that we take for granted. And every single one of those is a miracle. 3,500 years later, 6 million plus martyrs later, 72 years later, we're still here. And we're still fighting with one another, but we're fighting in a way that's hugging and wrestling, as they say in Makom.
Thank
Gil,
you.
this is many years of marriage talking. I've learned that the love is what remains after we know the truth.
Touche.
Thank you both. Thank you both. You've given us much to think about and a lot to motivate us. And now recognizing that this webinar is attended by a gathering of outstanding, influential, and visionary professionals from across the breadth of the Jewish community, I want to ask each of you in the next 5 minutes, each of you get 2.5, what would you have our participants take away from this conversation? And what, in your minds, are the bright spots? What are the organizations or the initiatives that you are aware of that are moving us in the right direction, and that we, wherever we are, in Israel, Chutz La'aretz, wherever we may be, what should we be turning our attention to? What should we be? Where should we be joining our efforts? Gil, why don't you start?
You said 2.5 hours?
2.5 minutes, Habibi.
Yeah. So look, I think a lot of it's tone. I think the tone, and I really want to thank Anat. We've actually never had the chance to meet before, but this tone of back and forth is so important. We do such a good job of setting the tone of nastiness, of anger, of judgmental, of finger pointing, but the tone of just love, of a tennis match between us. We may not agree with everything, but we're part of it. We're on the same team is so important. I think what I was trying to do at the beginning was introduce some language and also picking up on your language. The more we're aware of a language of of unity, not uniformity, of inclusiveness. You know, we all talk about diversity and inclusivity. Yeah, we're not so good at it when it comes to our own people. And the more we try to bring in language like that, the more we try to think of ideas that work. And, you know, you look at people like those wonderful, wonderful parents of the 3 boys who were kidnapped, who took the worst trauma of their lives and turned it into a crusade for unity. And so, of course, we have to fix the problems. Of course, we have to acknowledge the problems. But I think the more we also look at the bridge builders, the more we become bridge builders, even while trying to fight and fix and heal, the more we'll be able to heal and work together.
Are there some bridge builders that you particularly affirm or would like to recommend to us?
You know, so I mean, I have a bias because I volunteer with Birthright. Again, this organization that the 3 parents started is such an important organization. But to me, I'm less of an organization guy. I'm more of an idea guy. And so I'm more concerned with us trying to find the platforms that get us talking to one another and less upon which particular organization will help or not.
All right, well, thank you. A thought leader's perspective. Now we'll take the activist perspective. Anat, what initiatives, organizations you think are bright spots and that we should be aware of and to which we can join our efforts wherever we happen to be situated in the Jewish world?
I'm a big fan of the New Israel Fund. I think the New Israel Fund is a wonderful collaboration of North American Jews and Israelis. The strategic aims of the New Israel Fund for this next 3 to 5 years are collaborations between Jews and Arabs to fight racism, to fight for equality and tolerance in Israel. They're a bit less focused on religious pluralism, which was their diet for the last 10 years. They're now seeing that Jewish-Arab collaboration is the most important one. I'm a big fan of the Bereaved Parents Forum, which is a organization of bereaved parents, bereaved relatives of both on the Palestinian side and the Israeli side. These people who lost their most precious relatives come together to speak in different congregations, a Palestinian and a Jew, supporting each other and trying to prevent other people from joining the forum, from losing loved ones in the conflict. My advice to the participants of this webinar, which I admire you all for coming here together, is to find the closest Israeli to where you are. That Israeli most likely will not be in synagogue. It's one of the hardest things to do, is to bring an Israeli to synagogue. And we should wonder what makes the people hate this stuff. Why Israelis are the hardest Jews to bring to synagogue, but you need to find them. I can already give you a hint. If you could prepare hummus that is fit for human consumption, Israelis will come. What you serve now is unfit. But if you are able to actually make hummus that's good, Israelis will come for that and criticize it. But try to talk to Israelis abroad about some of the issues that are now burning in my heart. For example, racism. The fact that I see Israelis who are saying, if what I feel is racism, I'm a proud racist. I just can't wrap my head around the tolerance and the tolerance of our society towards outrageous racism towards different minority, first and foremost the Arab minority, which during this corona crisis is saving our lives. 34% of all doctors in Israeli hospitals are Arabs, and nursing staff is over 40%, and lab technicians and pharmacologists. They're saving our lives. If they walked out of the health system today, it would fall apart. And yet, people are still allowing themselves to say broad racist comments about the 1.2 million Israeli Arabs. So I think that's the way to go.
Could we just throw the word some in front of it? Some people, some Israelis, some Orthodox.
You're right. Some people are allowing themselves to do it, and too
reprehensible
many of us are quiet about it. So the silence of so many of us, and I'm telling you, Gil, when we go to a store, remember when we used to go to stores?
Yeah.
And there'll be a comment about an Arab in the store. How likely are you to say, Slicha, this is racist. I'm not going to buy here again if you talk like this about an Arab. We have these incidences, I would say, every day. Every day that you have an opportunity to be either quiet or voice that you are against racism. I don't know where you spend your time, but for me, it's a daily occurrence. And I call it a Shoah moment. It brings immediately the Shoah to my mind.
Thank you,
And
Anat.
sadly, many times I'm quiet and I'm ashamed of it.
What did Elie Wiesel write about? That is the silence of good people that makes evil possible. I want to thank you both. Your words, your sentiments, your insights, your passions are not only a fitting tribute to Danny and his life work, they reflect, mirror very accurately what his own motivations and values and vision were during his lifetime. In the spirit of the rabbinic observation that Talmidim Chachamim Chadedim Zeh et Zeh, that when two wise and knowledgeable persons contend in conversation, each emerges more acute, more sharpened, keener, if you will. So have we, because we have been able to listen in to the conversation that you've had this morning in our presence and in honor of our dear friend Danny. Now I'd like to turn the remainder of our webinar over to the CEO of the JPRO Network, Ilana Azen.
Thank you very much, Jack. Anat and Gil, it really is an honor for all of us. It feels very animating to be listening to your conversation, and we have opened up now to questions from those who are here. So again, for those who are here, please feel free to put a question in the chat if you'd like to ask it. I want to turn first to a question here from David J. And he writes, it's interesting that when we talk about Jewish peoplehood and what is next, we fall into speaking about Israel. And then he writes, surely Jewish peoplehood has to have a wider vision and purpose. So I would love Gil first, and then Anat, if you would please comment, respond to that question.
So the power of never alone, and obviously the move is from 75 years of obsession with never again to an understanding of the power of never alone, is we are never alone in Australia, in the US, in Canada, in Argentina, all over. And the power is, look, I'll go high and I'll go low. Low, when I'm traveling and you bump into another Jew, you get bageled, right? And it doesn't mean, oh, we're better. It just means we have a shared we have a shared vocabulary, we have a shared history, and we have a shared responsibility to keep the conversation going. And I'm gonna be very controversial and go high and inject a very complicated and problematic word, especially in America today, which is nationalism. And I will not allow, and I don't want to get political, but I will not allow Donald Trump to put his golden T on nationalism and define nationalism only on his terms. I can't explain America and all its achievements. I can't explain Zionism, I can't explain Israel, and I can't explain Jewish peoplehood without talking about this word nationalism, which at its best is liberal nationalism, which brings out the best in us, which brings us connected to one another, which says, I am alone and I can only do so much alone. But when I work with others, when I connect with others through high ideals, through good values, through a mission, I'm not putting up walls, but I'm spreading my wings, and my right wing, my left wing, like a good bird, are soaring high. And we need to take back the night. And we need to take back that word nationalism, not just for the Jewish people's sake, not just for Israel's sake, but for America's sake too.
I agree with David that we shouldn't have spoken only about Israel. However, David, you know that Israel is the fastest growing, largest Jewish community on the planet. So it does dominate what Judaism is. For example, Hebrew. When I was a student at UCLA in America, I heard North American Jews pronounce Hebrew in the Ashkenazi pronunciation, which is perfectly legitimate, you know, Shabbos, Yom Tovim, like that. And I don't hear it anymore. The Jewish world is speaking Hebrew in the staccato Sephardi pronunciation of Israel, because an army of Israeli teachers have taught Hebrew this way. God help us if we teach Judaism the way we practice it here in Israel. I am so delighted that you are not part of the ultra-Orthodox monopoly here in Israel, and you are not that way. I would like to prevent Israel from dominating in Jewish practice. I want to hear 1,000 voices, and may 1,000 flowers bloom. But it's important to say that what you're contributing to the discourse is precious and important. And you're right, we shouldn't have focused only on Israel. Toda.
Thank you both. I want to close. I'm going to ask you two questions. And I'll just give you both a few minutes to share closing thoughts in response to one or both of these questions. The first is to ask again about bright spots, and this time to ask about bright spots that you see specifically coming from the Canadian and American Jewish communities, which is where JPRO Network's membership comes from. So as we think about Jewish peoplehood and what's next, whether it's specific institutions, thought leaders, broader sociological trends, what are the bright spots for what's next coming from Canada and the US? And then again, I want to give you the opportunity, if you have, do you have any marching orders for us, the people who power Jewish community institutions in the US and Canada? We have every generation of professionals represented in this call, all different role types, programmers, educators, financial managers, fundraisers, people in the first year of their career, people who have been in the field forever. So this is an opportunity to give us some guidance. So it would be great to hear you speak to one or both of those for a minute or two, and then we'll turn to closing remarks.
Who, Anat first or me?
Why don't this time we'll go to Anat first.
So my advice is to look at the brightest resource of Israel, which is Israelis. And I urge you all to meet Israelis. They could be the worst, but they could be the best. And I think either visiting in Israel or seeing Israelis abroad, meeting Israelis and joining hands on something that resonates between you and an Israeli would be the best thing. So when you visit Israel, fewer Roman ruins and more live Israelis. The second thing is a trip which is Ra Israel, meaning a trip where you only meet people that the government think are very nice, means that you will not meet the Martin Luther King of Israel, because you realize that the American government would never have introduced you to Martin Luther King Jr. when he was alive. So I think you should meet some of the NGOs which are not in the government's menu. Expose yourself to a diet, a media diet, which is different from that of the government. Because those Israelis who are fighting now for democracy and pluralism and equality are feeling very alone. And we are turning to you because you have a wonderful legacy of democracy and you know a lot about racism and how to fight it. We're turning to you and we're asking for your support, encouragement, knowledge. You are a wealth of information. We have so much to learn from you. So this is an open invitation.
Thank you, Anat.
Bright spots, at the risk of quoting George H.W. Bush, as I travel around the United States of America and Canada, I see many, many, many points of light in the American Jewish community and the Canadian Jewish community. I go to campus, and whereas the headline is all about Jews abandoning Israel and criticizing Israel and bashing Israel. I meet young students left and right. It doesn't matter who care about Israel, who care about their Jewish identity. I have the privilege, as I said, of volunteering with Birthright as their education chair. And I literally have the opportunity to sit year after year and meet with thoughtful, creative, smart, passionate young Jews who are making a revolution, who understand that the old way of building a Jewish peoplehood, which is on the guilt trip and on anti-Semitism and on negativity, doesn't work, and that we have to have a positive vision. I see the power of camps and the power of informal 24/7 Jewish education, which was not respected at all 20 years ago and 30 years ago when Doron Krakow and I were at Camp Tel Yehuda. I see I see Doron's leadership, by the way, at the JCCA, bringing in that sense of informal, three-dimensional Judaism, which is an Israeli idea now brought to the United States. I see, especially in Toronto and Montreal, Jewish education. And I see the conversation, which is really essential, about the high cost of being Jewish, and what I call the high cost of being Jewish, and the high cost of the high cost of the high cost of being Jewish. The high cost of being Jewish is how expensive it is to send, and you professionals, right? How much it costs for you to send your kids to Jewish day school and camps. And then the high cost is the distortion that often occurs in so many of these camps, I'm sorry to say, and schools, which often end up being far too careerist and far too money obsessed. And the high cost of the high cost of the high cost is watching 20-something-year-olds not go to your noble professions, but go follow the money because they want to afford how to be Jewish. So this is a very, very important conversation we need to be having about how we really create the high quality Jewish experience. So marching orders is, I think, of course, be critical, of course, be self-critical, but also let's see what's underlying it. Let's see those wonderful miracles that we take for granted, and think through how we leverage those miracles, leverage the power, leverage those glues, leverage the bright spots, leverage inspirational stories like Rabbi Danny's, and keep those ideas alive, because it's unbelievable. I mean, I'll just give one little story and I'll finish. I have a friend who's a high-powered money guy in the city in London. And he says, every Monday when I come back to work, after my weekend of having gone to shul and having had some kind of brunch and maybe gone to a simcha and then gone to a charity event, my buddies want to hear just what I did this weekend. And it's a ritualistic thing. I mean, obviously not so much now in the coronavirus, but look how we're suffering. We are addicted to one another. We are committed to one another. We create communities. And he says, these people who, they spent their weekend having golf games and watching video games, he says, they feel so lonely. I'm caricaturing a little bit, but there's something, we have this power of community. We have this 3,500-year-old conversation about values, and we have this extraordinary experiment in constructive liberal nationalism called the State of Israel. We have so many assets. We're so much better off than our people 50 years ago and 100 years ago, let alone 500 years ago and 1,000 years ago. So my best advice to you is lean in and embrace that and celebrate it. We are so darn lucky to be living in 2020 with all the headaches and all the invisible plagues. I wouldn't give it up for any other period, and I'm a historian.
Thank you. Thank you for those beautiful closing words from both of you. We're going to have closing words in a moment. First, I want to thank Anat and Gil again, Rabbi Jack Luxemburg, Doron, and Rabbi Elke Abrahamson, who will speak in a moment. And I also really want to thank Mary Lou, Noah, Sarah, and Uri, who have been our partners in envisioning this program from day one. And now I want to turn it over to Rabbi Elke Abrahamson, the president of the Wexner Foundation, to offer some thoughts about Rabbi Daniel Allen.
Thank you, Alana. And I also want to thank the family for giving me this very treasured spot. There are so many people on this call who could speak personally about Danny. And when I was asked, I thought, well, why me? And the answer was not hard for me to land on. The call started with Doron talking about having, I think, Noah as a camper. And I was Mary Lou's camper. I think 1970 or 71. Mary Lou, you can correct me in the chat. And it was the summer that she met Danny, who was my Rosh Hashanah. So I had a very up close and personal view of this budding romance. Mary Lou's hair was in braids and Danny's hair was in a ponytail. I have to just give a shout out to the St. Paul girls here. Mary Lou and I are both from St. Paul, and her dad, my dad was her milkman. I'm ready, Mary Lou. So, in the summer of 1970, Danny was a unit head and I was camper. And I was just figuring out who I was as a Jew. And it was Tisha B'Av, and at Herzl Camp, Tisha B'Av was, as many summer camps did, was a very heavy day, and it became the day to remember every single tragedy that ever befell not only Jewish people, but any human being. The drama was very high. And at Herzl Camp, we, like many camps, built this huge structure, and then of course the staff would burn it down, and we talk about how we felt about having our structure burned down. And it was burned down from the roof, and this flame would come down on a wire and burn our temple. And at the end of Tisha B'Av, I was staring at that fire for a long time. And I looked back in the Ulam, which is the, as you'd imagine, was a big orange auditorium. And I could see that there was one person left in the room. And in the center of the room, the staff had set up a Sefer Torah that was surrounded by a barbed wire fence. And all the room, the lights were out, except for this spot on this fenced-in Torah. And I stood back behind the door and watched Danny navigate to climb through that fence. Didn't know anybody was watching. It was just me and him. He didn't know I was watching. And he leaned over and kissed the Torah. And I just never seen anything like that. You know, I grew up in a wonderful congregation, in a wonderful community, but the Torah was always kept at a bit of a distance. And I waited for him. I had chutzpah, even then. And I said, Dan, I didn't know that you could kiss the Torah like that. And he said, oh, you know, of course you can. And he took me into the room and let me kiss the Torah. And that's what Danny did. He, for me personally, I can't speak for everyone else on the call, but he just gave me permission at the right day and the right time in my life to get close to Torah when a lot of people weren't giving me that permission. And I never forgot it. And that's just one of many, many ways he taught me as an adolescent, as did Mary Lou as my counselor. And one of the things we all know about summer camp is that once someone's your counselor, they're your counselor for life, like it or not. So I want to thank my madricha for asking me to do this today.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. And thank you all again. It's good to be together. And with that, I wish you all well in this complicated time, and may we have opportunities soon to be together in person.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thank you. Be well all.
Gil Troy.
Thank you.